3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
to remind the current regime
What your country...
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
to get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
Earlier this week, the House Judiciary Committee received a letter from Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook and CEO of its parent company, Meta. In the letter, he admits to collusion between his company and the Biden-Harris administration at the expense of the American people. Here's a quote. In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our teams for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. Ultimately, it was our decision whether or not to take content down, and we own our decisions, including COVID-19 related changes we made to our enforcement in the wake of this pressure. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I also think we made some choices that, with the benefit of hindsight and new information, we wouldn't make today. Like I said to our teams at the time, I feel strongly that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction, and we're ready to push back if something like this happens again. He goes on to say that Meta bent to the will of the administration in suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. He also says that he'll desist from his past efforts to influence elections via the so-called Zuckerbucks programs. For conservatives, this letter seems like good news, but the truth is more complicated. Jake Denton, research associate in the Tech Policy Center here at the Heritage Foundation, joins the podcast to explain. Jake Denton, welcome back to Heritage Explains.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we've got you on this week because on Monday, the House Judiciary Committee received a letter from Meta founder Mark Zuckerberg. And in that letter, he said a lot of interesting things. So tell us about this letter. What was going on and what was said here?
Yeah, so it's really nothing new. Missouri v. Biden, the case we saw unfold over the summer, basically outlined how Meta was in direct correspondence with the Biden White House and related agencies about censoring COVID material on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And what this letter does is essentially an admission of guilt from Mark Zuckerberg for complying with the correspondence. You know, these agencies, these government officials were basically saying this is misinformation, could have been something from a meme to a video. But the nature of the interaction is basically just take this down. We want this gone. And Zuckerberg greenlit that, so it's basically Facebook policy to comply with these requests. And what resulted from that was just like a cascading effect of censorship and really deplatforming. And you weren't able to communicate, whether it be the truth or, fact, fiction, doesn't really matter. Just bottom line is if it dissented from the popular conversation, it was not going to be hitting the feeds of your followers or the Discover pages of maybe a new audience. So massive impact on, how we viewed COVID. It completely rewrote history. We're all consuming the news through social. And then, you basically look backwards because obviously this isn't the first time this has happened, and all the other social incidents that we've watched happen, whether it be the Hunter Biden laptop or any of these other massive notes that have just kind of like been essentially memory hold. We don't talk about them anymore. These were all, things where Meta complied with requests from government. And so this really is just a question about like, what should that actually look like? Should we even have that? This is kind of what this letter should prompt.
So essentially, this is an admission of guilt from Meta. Why would Mark Zuckerberg be motivated to write this letter?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, it's addressed to the House Judiciary, Congressman Jim Jordan, who's been poking around a lot when it comes to, Missouri v. Biden. You've seen all sorts of Facebook files, Amazon files. He's really put these executives under the microscope, and they obviously have done a lot of wrongdoing. There's been kind of a vibe shift in Silicon Valley. Zuckerberg has kind of pivoted his public image a little bit. He's trying to become a little more appealing. If you read the letter, it's kind of not just an admission of guilt, but he's saying sorry. He shouldn't have complied with it. He felt like it was wrong in the moment, and he wouldn't do it again in the future. He's also committed not to basically do Zuckbucks again, where he donates obscene amounts of money to tip the elections in their favor. To me, it seems like a little bit of a PR maneuver. Obviously, he didn't have to write it this way. And he seems to almost be deflecting the blame a little to the Biden administration and be like, hey, they forced us. We just kind of went along with it. Government's scary. But, he makes a note about how it isn't really conducive for freedom of speech and all these different things. The government shouldn't be involved here. It's interesting, but at the end of the day, like, action speaks louder than words. The same day they sent that letter, they probably got 100 inbound emails from government. Are we ever going to see those, right? Like, obviously these communications are going to keep happening. Nicole Shanahan, who's obviously running with RFK and they've just dropped out, endorsed Trump, came out and said, why don't you just open sourcing all communications with government? If you're so opposed to this and you think that the public deserves to know about it, publish every inbound communication from a government agency. It's like a novel idea. There's maybe some sensitive stuff there that might be omitted, but like, we should probably know about this. It's crazy we had to wait till COVID to basically figure out this was happening.
We're coming up on an election. One of the big conversations is censorship on these platforms, which we kind of view, correctly or incorrectly, as a public forum, as the public square. What does this say about the state of free speech and censorship on platforms like Facebook?
Yeah, I think, censorship has changed a lot since 2021, what we saw during the COVID pandemic in the early days. But I think generally the public believes we still live in that 2021 censorship environment. Obviously, that was kind of defined by very public and very large accounts being deplatformed or suspended, shadow banning. We became really familiar with these methods of essentially suppressing messages on social media platforms. But now, as we approach 2025, there's another big event, the election, and the playbook seems to have shifted a little bit. They're reinstating some of these accounts, they're bringing people back, and it seems to be that their preferred method of censorship is really just limiting what people are able to see, not what people are able to say. And so it's kind of a philosophy change. You maybe still post, you maybe get the likes, the retweets, the views, but are the right people seeing them? You don't really know. And I think that's a much more damaging censorship agenda because, you're basically running on the hamster wheel thinking you're reaching your audience. You think you're having impact, but it's almost as bad, if not worse, as when you were deplatformed or banned. At least when you were banned, you knew you were banned and you could, go out and knock on doors or talk to people in the community. This makes you think you're actually doing something with your posts and you're not. And so Zuckerberg, didn't commit to not doing that, or, none of these other social CEOs have owned up to that. I think we've even got from X, the whole concept of freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. That's actually like a really bad world to live in where you think you are, talking to people, but you're really just screaming into the void.
You mentioned like a vibe shift in Silicon Valley. Do you think that our trajectory with big tech has been positive or negative over the recent months?
I think this long battle we've been in with big tech as the Heritage Foundation, as the conservative movement, is starting to pay off. I think, they're coming around to maybe the idea that the way they were behaving, their allegiance to the left, isn't sustainable long term. And you're seeing major detractors, whether it be Elon Musk or Mark Andreessen, these kind of figureheads of really the tech movement in Silicon Valley that have long either stayed quiet or aligned with the left, coming out and explicitly endorsing President Trump, saying, full, I support him, you should vote for him. That is like a very notable thing that's happening. And we can try and pinpoint, where it is that, flipped them, whether it be the censorship thing going too far and them having some, constitutional principles, we shouldn't be stepping on the First Amendment. Maybe it's just the deterioration of San Francisco and, they're living under basically left-wing rule and they see that, when they walk out their $1 million apartment door, there's a dead person. Maybe that's where we're on them a little bit. Hard to say really what has caused this, but these are the figureheads, the luminaries, the people who are responsible at the top for these platforms, and them kind of detracting, going the other way, becoming more conservative, will have like a downstream effect on governance on the platforms. And we don't know what that looks like. Obviously, X has improved dramatically since when Jack was in charge, Jack Dorsey. Maybe the investment shifts a little bit as these venture capital funds and maybe some conservative entrepreneurs have new competing products, but there's still a long road ahead. Google's really not corrected any behavior. Meta, maybe optically, PR-wise, is trying to change their footing, but foundationally, it's the same trust and safety people that were behind the COVID censorship and the Hunter Biden laptop. That one's going to be a lot harder to untangle. And at the end of the day, we talk about it here a lot, like personnel is policy. They're staffed by a bunch of people who hate the country and hate what we have to say. Maybe your CEO is someone who's aligned with us, but it's going to take a lot to cleanse these businesses of this kind of like mind virus that's obviously just been a plague in San Francisco.
After reading this, did you have more regard for Mark Zuckerberg or less?
The whole PR pivot from him is really clever because it strikes at exactly what we want to see as, conservative men. He's fighting jujitsu. He's, not eating seed oils and doing all these things. He goes on Bloomberg in a, black t-shirt and a gold chain. It's hard not to respect the pivot he's making, but at the end of the day, he's the same guy, right? He hasn't done anything to prove he's had a real change of heart. He's just changed his brand and his image. And we're uniquely susceptible for falling for this type of thing. We do all the time. Someone who we've previously hated comes out, changes a little something, and we're totally fine with them again. We forget everything. But, he spent hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that President Trump didn't win. It's not enough to just come out and say you think he's cool because you got shot. That's not going to really make up for censoring him, deplatforming him, banning all of us from talking on the platform. You have a lot of work you got to do to fix your public image. So no, I think he's the same guy that went along with the first request. He just has a better PR team behind him.
Thank you to Jake Denton for his contribution to this episode. You can follow Denton on X at RealJDenton, and you can find more of his work at heritage.org. And of course, thanks as always to you for listening to Heritage Explains. As always, you can reach out to us with your thoughts, questions, or suggestions at heritageexplains@heritage.org. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Heritage Explains is written and produced by Mark Gagne, Lauren Evans, and John Popp.